Everyone. I am Maggie Fry. I'm an assistant professor in the department, and I'm here to talk to you about one of the workshops, the Modeling and Measuring Culture workshop, which I co-run with Andre, who is going to introduce himself in just a minute. And I also wanted to mention that in addition to the two of us, we also have a graduate student who helps to run the workshop. His name is Jeff Swindle, and he is responsible for scheduling the meetings and sort of coordinating the speakers and also ordering all of the delicious food that we have during our meetings. Um, all right, I'm going to hand it over to Andre.
Um, hi. Hi. I'm Andre Butelin. Welcome to my very messy home office where I would never be presenting this to people were it not for the COVID situation going on. This workshop is something that Maggie and I started last semester, and we started it because there's already is a sociology of culture workshop in the department, but culture is just this really big topic that you can approach in a lot of very different ways. So sociology of culture is the largest section of the ASA, in part because sociologists wrestle with questions of culture kind of no matter what we do empirically. Culture is a huge range of topics, including things that are symbolic, cognitive, behavioral, or kind of interactional. So everything from meanings to schemas to stereotypes, categories, narratives, values, practices, habits, etc. So the thing that unites all of these things is obviously that they're all shared. But another thing that unites them is that they're all quite difficult to study systematically. And because of this, questions about how to measure and model them have always been central to the study of culture. So these are questions like what attributes, behaviors, and outcomes we should be observing, how we can assess similarity and variation across people and within groups, or across artifacts, texts, whatever, and how we can actually kind of make sense of this, how we can assemble a systematic set of representations based on this. So the our idea for the workshop is to kind of tackle these questions of measuring and measurement and modeling very broadly. So the idea is both to have quantitative and qualitative presentations. So basically the idea is just kind of no matter what your method, this is the right place for you if you're interested in thinking deeply about measurement and systematic analysis, even if you don't think of yourself as being interested in methodology. And along the same lines, we also want this to be the place for students who don't think of themselves as culture people, because basically, no matter what sociologists do empirically, to some extent, they're tackling questions of culture. And so this workshop is for you if you want to think of your research in terms of culture and sort of see what thinking of it in terms of culture kind of gets you, see what you learn, see what approaching your research from the point of view of culture kind of reveals about it. And our hope, another reason we kind of want this to be a broad space methodologically and subdisciplinarily, and the reason that we've, I think, successfully made it into that kind of broad space is that we think that helping one another wrestle with thorny methodological and conceptual issues across subfields is enriching to all of us as scholars. Okay, Maggie?
Great, thanks, Andre. So next I wanted to just talk a little bit about how we spend our time together in this workshop, and the way that we sort of organized the year. So I should also mention that this is the first year that the Measuring and Modeling Culture workshop has been running. So Andre and I thought of it last spring, and we think we've had a really successful first year, and we're excited to continue it. So basically, the way that we meet about every 2 weeks on average, and typically there's one person who presents their research during those meetings. About half the time, that person will share a written piece of work beforehand, usually about a week beforehand, and the other half of the time they just present their like a PowerPoint or sort of more of an oral presentation. So we usually spend about 10 to 15 minutes kind of talking about general stuff at the beginning, and then make sure everybody has a chance to get food, and then we go right into the presentation. And we always like to leave lots of time for questions at the end, but we also are sort of the kind of style of presentation where people often jump in with questions and suggestions in the middle. So it's a really informal space, and we always have lots of discussion throughout the sessions. We've tried to really instill a culture of reading each other's work. So if somebody does share a paper, you can tell that pretty much everybody in the room has taken time to read it and to think about their feedback beforehand. So that's something that I'm really happy about. I guess the other thing I'll say is that one of the things that Andre and I have really emphasized is using this workshop as a space to build community with other people who are thinking about measurement. So one of the ways that we do that is we try to have happy hours after the session. So we often go to Ashley's, which is the bar just down the road, and share beers together, and then order some snacks to share. So that happens pretty frequently after the sessions. Another way that we tried to build community is during our first workshop, as kind of a way to introduce ourselves to each other. We asked everybody to think of a puzzle from their own research that has to do with measuring or modeling, something related to culture or meaning. So each of us went around the room and shared either a graph or a piece of data or something from our research that reflects how we're thinking about culture in our own research. And then I guess the other thing that I'll say is that just in terms of kind of the kinds of people who present, so this semester we had scheduled 7 workshops, and 3 of those are faculty presenters and 4 are grad student presenters. And I guess all 3 of the faculty were collaborations with grad students. So the majority of our time as a workshop is spent on grad student work. So now I'll hand it back to Andre.
Okay, so I guess, we wanted to talk about some examples of the kinds of work that we've had presented at this workshop, which is actually pretty broad. And so, as we mentioned, the ranges from, we have both quantitative and qualitative work being presented. We also have both methodological and theoretical work. So the work that I presented myself earlier this semester was a project that I'm doing with a grad student in philosophy, actually, where we are developing this kind of theoretical idea of cultural schemas. Cultural schemas is a really central concept in sociology of culture and just sort of in sociology more broadly, but it's a concept without a single definition, with actually multiple competing ones, etc. So Laura, my co-author, and I have spent about a year wrestling with it and trying to come up with a way of thinking about schemas that makes them function as a central object in a cumulative research program, which just means that they're defined in such a way that you can clearly enough tell what's a schema and what isn't a schema that you can add knowledge to it. So you can kind of build out the idea of schemas from that. In addition to that, the other project that I presented was my collaboration with 2 grad students, where we are using 70 years of American print media to look at the change in how gender and education are related. So basically looking at the different gendered contexts in which education related terms appear. So I'm just going to show you some plots from this work because it's I'm a failed artist before becoming a sociologist, and so I still have a lot of aesthetic instinct left over. So I spent way too long on these plots, which is why I wanted to share them with you. So so this is a plot from that work where we're looking at how a bunch of schooling-related terms go from 1940s and 2000s, and we're showing that basically across this broad range of schooling-related things, schooling goes from being gender neutral to being feminine across time. And so we look at a bunch of different domains for education-related things, like you can see that anger and violence and such are steadily masculine throughout this period. Kind of our big finding in this work is that intelligence and studiousness have opposite gender codings across time. That basically they start out both pretty neutral, but by the 2000s, intelligence becomes strongly masculine, whereas studiousness comes to be seen as strongly feminine. And you could see how it's this intensely close mirror image, which makes it look like it's kind of a new cultural regime emerging, like these things are really changing at the same time. And also, Rachel Best, who's another faculty at this department, also was presenting a WorkDevec-based project. I guess we are now becoming a place where there's multiple. WorkDevec is becoming a thing here because it's this cool tool. So she's using it to look at disease stigma, and she's using, I think it was. I actually don't remember exactly how long. I think it was maybe 60 years of news media, and so specifically news texts, and looking at how different diseases are discussed and kind of measuring the ways in which different diseases and sort of health-related things are stigmatized along different dimensions, which is actually really cool because disease stigma, or just stigma in general, is an important sociological concept, but it's not one that's always amenable to study on a kind of systematic scale like that. So that's been a kind of really cool project to see presented and developed here. And I think for all these projects, we've gotten and given very good feedback. Like this has been a very good workshop for kind of intense, good engagement with this work. And Maggie, can you talk about a couple more projects?
Great. Yeah. So I wanted to share one of my favorite projects that was presented by a graduate student was presented by a student here whose name is Lydia. And Lydia is working on studying neighborhoods and the different reputations that neighborhoods have. So basically thinking about culture in terms of how we form ideas about places that we either want to live, places that are more desirable, less desirable. So what she did is she designed a survey where, so she had a sample of people, say, who lived in Chicago, and she showed all of the neighborhoods in Chicago. And she first asked them to identify all the neighborhoods that they were familiar with in some way. And then of those neighborhoods that they were familiar with, she asked them to identify ones that they would want to live in, ones that they would not want to live in, and kind of rank them in order of desirability. And then she also asked some other questions about the different neighborhoods. And so that gives her a way of thinking about how places that people live have these stereotypical kind of ideas related to whether or not they're nice places to live that are different from things that we can measure using other data like crime rates or poverty or other things that we think of. So basically how our ideas about neighborhoods may or may not be different from what's actually going on the ground in those neighborhoods. And then just to close this off, I wanted to share, so I presented during our first session a book that I've been working on with 8 other people. So it's a massive group of collaborators, and the book is actually titled Measuring Culture. So Omar Lizardo, John Moore, Ann Misch, Fred Wary, those are just a few of the, Ito Tavori, those are a few of the co-authors. I won't name all 8 of them. But what we did is I got some of my co-authors to Skype into our first meeting, and I had the group read the introduction from the book, and then the first chapter from the book, which was about measuring culture in people. And then the last chapter in the book, where what we did is we talked about a couple of big famous projects in sociology of culture and interviewed the authors of those projects on kind of the problems that they encountered related to measurement. And so I presented that book as a way to get us started with the discussion of measuring culture in our workshop. And the book will be out in July of this year. So I think that is all that we wanted to tell you about our workshop, but please feel free to email either of us if you have any questions after you watch this video, and we'd really love to include you next year, and we hope that you decide to come to Michigan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.